The views and opinions expressed in this video are those of the speakers and panelists, and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ETHOS Institute for Public Christianity and its founding institutions and organizations.
God's concern for justice is echoed in the work of legislators, government regulators, lawyers, judges, police, paralegal workers, anyone involved in maintaining justice or redressing injustice. So too is the work of social activists, investigative journalists, advocates for minority groups, and consumer protection. Any occupation that helps people receive equal treatment, which challenges discrimination, which seeks conflict resolution, maybe occasionally revolution, is relevant here. What about God's work as revealer? Any kind of work that communicates truth of any kind, to do with anything or anyone, reflects in some degree God's passion for truth and God's being ultimate truth. Anyone who provides real insight into the meaning of life, to personal relationships, the natural world, to past and present societies, philosophers, sociologists, psychologists, scientists, historians, educators, social commentators, etc., in some sense is moving in this kind of world, if they do their job properly and if we are beneficiaries of what they provide. So too, artists, poets, novelists, screenwriters and playwrights, to the extent that they unearth truth and illuminate for us something that is absolutely real and incontrovertible. To differing degrees, limited by our human sinfulness and limitations, all these reflect traces of knowledge left by God in our consciences and in His creation, as Romans 1:17 tells us. Finally, in this area, God's involvement in restoring us to His original purposes and our world to its original purpose. The work of doctors, nurses, paramedics, counsellors, psychologists, therapists, welfare workers, those involved in restorative justice, in seeking to conserve the environment, to restore it where it's been trashed. All of these are, in some sense, doing something which has some connection with what God is concerned about. God certainly works in ways we can't. His work is both quantitatively and qualitatively more than anything we can ever, even all the people on earth through all the centuries, can produce. The work we do is restricted by our infirmities and by our weaknesses, our ingrained sinfulness. But it is not just that these kinds of work that I mentioned, of an ordinary kind, reflect something of what God is seeking to happen, but they are actually the ways through which God partly achieves His work of creation, providential care, bringing and redressing justice and injustice, revealing truth, as well as other things to do with building community, restoring lives and the world as a whole. God draws us in to His own ongoing creative, providential, judicial, revelatory and redemptive work in the world. He makes us collaborators in fulfilling His everyday purposes. Luther and Calvin understood this centuries ago and wrote about it extensively. I quote a modern Lutheran who puts it in slightly more contemporary language. God gives us our daily bread through the vocation of the farmer, the miller, the baker. God protects us through the lawful magistrate. Vocation is first of all about how God works through human beings. In his providential care and his governing of his creation, God chooses to distribute his gifts by means of ordinary people exercising their ordinary talents, which actually are gifts of God. So, God heals by means of doctors, nurses, and other medical vocations. God has other ways of healing at his disposal, of course, too. But primarily, he does it through such people. He makes our lives easier by means of inventors, scientists, and engineers. He creates beauty by means of artists, authors, and musicians. He gives us clothing, shelter, and other things we need by means of factory workers, construction contractors, and others who work with their hands. He cleans up after us by means of janitors and garbage collectors. God thus looms behind everyone who provides us with the goods or services that we need. This means that all work and all workers deserve some honour, even if they don't know the source of the work that they do and who it mirrors. In our vocations, we work side by side with God, as it were, taking part in his ceaseless creative activity and labouring with him as he providentially cares for his creation. Collaborators with God's work, not just in our own limited way reflecting something of what God does. No wonder when he talked about this in one of his lectures to his students, Luther paused. Paused for a long time. The students wondered whether he was falling into a trance, whether somehow he had fallen ill, or had the great master gone asleep with his eyes open. But after 2 or 3 minutes, Luther looked up and said to them, "Who can understand this? Who can begin to even sense what extraordinary honour God has given us in making us participants in his everyday work?" If we take the Bible as a whole, from beginning to end, as a little snapshot of what God is about, this is what we find. The first human beings are called by God to work, have families, grow in numbers, and cultivate the earth. This involved not just agricultural, but also cultural development, music, early technology, the first institutions. The Protestant theologians of the Reformation called this God's creation mandate, the divine charter for every aspect of human life, the Magna Carta of the whole human enterprise. As we move on through the early books of the Bible, as men and women decide to reject God's authority and go their own way and break into competing nations, God doesn't just abandon what he has been doing or what his ultimate intention is. He continues to care about and sustain people, and God continues to draw on people, even in their sinful state, to work some of this through to achieve it. But in particular, he focuses on developing one nation amongst all the nations to exemplify what he is on about, the nation of Israel, as we know. And as well as having prophets to keep the nation on track, and counsellors, wise men to provide down-to-earth advice, and religious leaders to help govern the whole enterprise and lead it, he requires some to be farmers to cultivate the land, to be traders to provide goods and other necessities, to be judges to redress wrongs that result from human failure, to be soldiers to defend the country from enemies, to be priests to serve temples and organise festivals, to be musicians to celebrate births, marriages and other great events. All have their part to play or their vocation to fulfil as citizens of God's divinely appointed nation. When Israel fails to live up to God's purposes, he increasingly focuses on a remnant of people within the nation. And this faithful remnant is to play its God-given role even if the people round about it in the nation do not. They're still to model what God's purposes are in this world and, as we will see, beyond this world. When the nation is defeated and exiled to a foreign country, it does not stop God continuing to do this work. He says to these people, your task now is to continue raising families, to build houses, to cultivate gardens, and to seek the welfare of the country in which I have placed you. Jeremiah 24:8. On its return from exile, Israel is given another chance to give God its allegiance and to represent his purposes. When Israel fails to live up even to this, and the remnant doesn't fully achieve it either, God sends his Son as our Saviour, our Redeemer, and also our Restorer. Not only redeeming us, but seeking ultimately to redeem the whole universe that he has created. Colossians 1, Ephesians 1. Jesus' followers have an even greater power to do this now because they have the Holy Spirit residing in them. And they're not only to share what God has done for them through his redemptive work, but also through their own quality of life, their relationships, and their work in the world to show something and demonstrate God's ultimate purposes for all people and the whole creation who are open to turning towards him. There are some who do this in a very public and focused way, like Paul and John and Peter and others. And they have various assistants like Timothy and Titus and Silas, who we know well. But all his people are to be involved in this through their normal family, work, social and civic responsibilities, wherever they happen to be. Not now just members of one nation, but as people increasingly scattered through all nations throughout the world. As the New Testament scholar Tom Wright says, the story that is the model of God's self-giving love in creation, covenant, judgment, mercy, incarnation, atonement, resurrection, and ultimate recreation must be the basis for all our understanding of life and our vocation. Understanding our ordinary work as this kind of investment in God's vocational work transforms our occupations into something out of the ordinary. It has the capacity to turn a typical postman or mailman, simply delivering letters and parcels to a range of people he doesn't know, into someone who is, and I quote, maintainer of links between scattered families and friends, bearer of gifts for special occasions, full of loving well wishes, conveyor of information about services in the local community, agent of business between suppliers and customers, creator of bonds between people from different cultures, messenger of greetings and encourager of those who share the Christian faith. This little description of what a postman is actually doing comes from the life of a real postman in Washington, D.C. And it's transcribed onto a plaque on the wall in this post office in the centre of Washington for all mail and postal people to have as their model. He understood his vocation, his divine vocation. Or a local solicitor becomes someone who not just simply advises clients about the contents of the law, but he becomes someone who is, and I quote again, a sensitive listener to deeper concerns that may lie beneath the specific issues they bring to him. A mediator for resolving difficult disputes between people outside the courtroom. A public spokesperson to protect manipulation of the law by the wealthier, larger organisations. A donor of time to members of the community who are too poor to seek help for themselves. A Christian lawyer, Joseph Allegretti, wrote a book about not just the need for lawyers to see themselves like this, but out of his own experience of actually living it and doing it in his legal practice. Seeing their ordinary work as a divine vocation and turn a businesswoman from simply desiring to deliver a profitable product or service into someone who fosters community and just treatment among her colleagues and workers, educates and trains her employees in skills that they lack or that they desire to have, gives workers room to express their concerns and supports their needs for innovation with resources and rewards, develops new products and services that meet genuine needs people have, creates a harmonious and congenial environment, including a view of God's creation for her staff. A friend of mine who was the CEO of a major company in the US actually helped with an architect design a building made for some 600 or 700 workers, in which every single person in that factory, it was a factory, whatever work they were doing, had a view of God's creation directly, in some sense, from where they were actually at their workstation, because he believed that was the important part of what he should provide for them to have, rather than just being surrounded by a bunch of noisy, metallic, continually operating machines. Understanding other people's daily works of divine vocation helps us to see, as one person has written, when I go into a restaurant, the waitress who brings me my meal, the cook in the back who prepared it, the delivery man, the wholesalers, the workers in the food processing factories, the butchers, the farmers, and everyone else in the economic food chain are being used by God to give me this day my daily bread. God works through people in their ordinary stations of life to which he has called them. And in this way he cares for all of us, Christian and non-Christian, to whom he has given life. On the surface we see an ordinary human face, our mother, a doctor, the teacher, a waitress, our pastor, etc. But beneath the appearances, God is ministering to us through them, all of them. When we live out our callings, spouses, parents, children, employees, citizens and the rest, God is working through us. This makes the point, which the Reformers were also very insistent on, that divine vocation does not just merely involve our work, but involves what takes place in our family, what takes place in our civic and social responsibilities, and of course what takes place in our church. All of these are caught up into God's wider vocational activities. We focus on work here because that is our subject for the day, but there's only one of at least four, and I think we could add a fifth, which I won't talk about, areas in which our vocation to God is filled out. The danger, of course, in our work today is that it has a tendency of becoming too much the one, sometimes almost the only one, the dominant area of our vocation at the expense of family life, at the expense of our social or civic responsibilities, at the expense of other commitments to other Christians and those who need to hear about God. Our vocation is where sanctification happens, chiefly happens, as Christians grow spiritually in faith and in good works. It's not just through reading the Bible and prayer and fellowship with other Christians or worship in a building that it takes place, but through the actual work that we do It spiritually disciplines us and shapes us. Vocation is where evangelism happens, as Christians teach their children and interact with non-believers. Vocation is where we happen to influence the wider society, as Christians take their place and live out their faith in every niche of the world around them. Let me return to the stories of the people that I mentioned at the beginning. Our temptation as Christians would often be to say that the story about Wei and Ling taking up full-time work overseas for God is one that, more than any other of the stories, shows us what vocation fully means. But in the light of what I have said, I hope that other possibilities reflected in the other four stories become clearer. Maya, the domestic servant, is extraordinarily involved, more if she is aware of it, in helping people day in, day out, young, old, animals as well, doing work that is providing the basis for others to live the life that they prefer. Providential work of the most basic, hard, challenging, and often unrewarded kind. IT assistant Chung is also involved in the kind of work which knits the world together, which enables all sorts of things to be known, to be acted upon, which intensifies the possibilities of new things being conceived and undertaken. The scientist, Xiao Hui, is at a lead edge of discovering all sorts of new possibilities, some small, some significant and wide-ranging, that will change the way in which the world is not only seen, but the way in which the world actually functions. The French sociologist, eminent Christian Jacques Ellul, was once asked, "Who are the people who have made the most significant difference to the way the world actually functions in the last 2 centuries?" And he shot back straight away, "There is no doubt, engineers and scientists." Even engineers, whom we hardly think about in that connection, have changed the way the world actually operates and affected the lives of every single person. Zheng Guo, giving life, purpose to people suffering from disadvantage and in some cases disabilities, is deeply involved in something which is at the very heart of what God is concerned about. Let me close by asking, is there anything more that work offers apart from, at best, being part of God's present purposes in the world in which we live, in time and space? Or is there anything which will last of the work that we do beyond our world? We know that God is anticipating and working towards ushering in a new heaven and earth. He's preparing it now. Does the end of this world indicate the end of anything that we do that has some kind of outflow from the work that our hands and our minds and our hearts are involved in? Does nothing survive into the new world God is making, as some have said? We know from Paul, 1 Corinthians 2:9, what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no mind has conceived, these are the things that God has prepared for those who love him. Yes, it's all something far beyond our imagination. It will be something that is just amazing to us. But the final judgment that marks the transition from our world to the next does not destroy everything that takes place in our world. We know for a start it doesn't destroy those who are gods. We know that it doesn't destroy, in some sense, the bodily form or some kind of form that they have. We are not purely spirits in which everything material has been sloughed away by the fire of judgment. No, the fire is more a refining fire, not a destructive fire. It's one in which, to quote Paul again, Philippians 4:8, whatever is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, good, excellent, and praiseworthy will in some sense, however transformed, however much transfigured, will survive in and through to the world that is to come. The picture of heaven given to us in Revelations 21 is not of a totally new creation. It is a city of glorious possibilities, forever open, 21-25, including the best of human culture, achievements past and possibly ongoing. And although this is not in any way limited to our work, it will include what we have accomplished through our work. Verses 24-26. What we have done, our splendour, will be brought and transformed and put on display as part of the glory and honour of the nations that the Apostle John talks about. Or to quote Tim Keller in his book Every Good Endeavour, if the God of the Bible exists and there is a true reality beneath and behind this one, and this life is not the only life, then every good endeavour, even the simplest ones, pursued in response to God's calling, matters forever. Whatever you are seeking in your work, a city of justice and peace, a world of brilliance and beauty, order, healing, whatever it is, it will be there. There is a God, there is a future healed world that he will bring about, and your work will be somehow revealed in essence through it to others. And inevitably the whole creation will come to fruition. If you know all this, you won't be despondent because you can only achieve a small measure of things in this life and only achieve them up to a certain degree. No, you will know that ultimately these will be taken up by God and transformed in some way that will give you extraordinary satisfaction and joy. As Paul says to his fellow Christians at the end of his great chapter on the coming resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15, because of all this, be strong. Don't allow anyone to change your mind. Always do your work well for the Lord, knowing that whatever you do for him will not be wasted. Thank you.